Uh, well, it's a
Okay.
great honor to once again welcome on this show Professor Lawrence Krauss. He is a physicist, a cosmologist, an author of numerous best-selling and endlessly fascinating books. The latest among them is titled The Physics of Climate Change, and he is also the creator of a new Substack titled Critical Mass, and he is the host of the podcast Origins. Um, he is a man of many accomplishments, and I'm very glad to have him on the show. So, how are you today, Lawrence?
Well, I'm fine. It's nice to be on the show. It's nice to be back with you again
Yeah.
here. And the only thing you didn't mention, you were quite kind in mentioning, is that my new book, The
Oh,
Known
yeah.
Unknowns, will be coming out in May of next year.
Oh boy, this is actually the first time I've heard of the book. So, can you tell us what
Oh, oh,
the book is about?
yeah, sure. It's actually, well, it's got two different names depending on where you are. In the UK and its territories, it'll be The Known Unknowns. Um, I think in the UK it has a subtitle too, which I keep forgetting. It's the Unsolved Mysteries of the Cosmos is the subtitle.
Mhm.
In the United States, it's being called The Edge of Knowledge,
Oh,
and it's about what we know we don't know about the universe,
mhm.
and everything from life, um, from space, time, matter, life, and consciousness. Those are the five sections,
I
and
see.
I'm quite excited about it. So anyway, returning
Well,
to my conventional frame of cosmology to some extent, and then going beyond it,
uh,
it's really an up-to-date discussion of what of the remaining known mysteries of the universe. Obviously, there are lots of unknown mysteries of the universe, but we don't know what they are.
mhm.
Okay. Anyway,
Right. So, do you have a preference as to which of the two titles?
um, well, let's see. That's a good question. Anyway, this is we can talk about this when the book comes out. I do like the known unknowns,
Mhm.
even though it harkens back to a quote by Donald Rumsfeld, who I'm not a big
Yeah.
fan of. But it was a good quote. So what the heck? Um, but the Edge of Knowledge is nice too. So my American publishers, because of the relationship that Donald Rumsfeld thought that it would be more appropriate to choose another title. So.
I see.
I would have stayed with the known unknowns, I guess. But on the other hand, it's interesting. When I announced it, I did get people pushing back and saying, "How dare you quote that guy?" Not that that matters to me, but anyway.
See. So, to continue on our sciencey topic, I understand that you recently came back from Greenland, so as part of the Origins project. So, can you tell us what
Yeah,
that was about?
yeah. The my Origins Project Foundation leads trips around the world to various places and have lectures by interesting people.
Mhm.
Um, Unfortunately, Barry Barish, who was scheduled to be the lecturer in Greenland, couldn't attend the Greenland part because his wife got COVID.
Oh,
So I was the lecturer, but it seemed to be okay for people. Um, but it was an amazing trip. We went up by boat from Iceland, from Reykjavik to Greenland, to the northeast coast of Greenland, and at some point we're about 200 miles north of the northernmost town in eastern Greenland, and north of the Arctic Circle. And I wanted to see Greenland before it turned green. Uh, and Having written about climate change, and it was just unbelievably impressive to see the vastness of that place, and its stark the geology, the incredibly the vistas of these cliffs coming out of the fjords, thousands of feet up, with 2 billion-year-old rocks that have evidence of continents crashing together and coming apart, and the isolation of it there, and um, the different world that it is. And also, we were quite lucky and saw whales and polar bears and northern lights. One of the other purposes was to spend some time under the northern lights.
Mhm.
But it was haunting in a way. And I spent a lot of time preparing some lectures on the history of science in Greenland, and I think that made it even more special for me when I was out on the boats looking up at the glaciers and imagining early explorers beginning their voyage where I was ending mine, beginning their voyage, climbing up the ice to the ice sheet and spending days or years up there. Anyway, it was a sobering and beautiful experience. And then we spent 5 additional days in Iceland, which is one of my favorite countries, and a country full of so many different contrasts, and every different corner has got an amazing vista, and the ground is steaming, and there's lava tubes, and there's mountains and the ocean, and not many people, which I also like. Um, and so it was wonderful to be able to lead the trip. And we also in Iceland had a special visit to a carbon capture facility, the
Mhm.
first commercial carbon capture facility, I think, in the world of its type, which turns carbon into rock. And it's not practical on a global scale, but it was really interesting to see the work that's being done there. And that was a special visit that was because I interacted with one of the physicists working on that. I gave a public lecture that night in Reykjavik, and our group got to see that. And we try with the Origins trips to try and have trips that have separate visits to things that the public generally can't see if possible.
Mhm. Well, it certainly sounds like the place I want to visit. And I know that I want to see the Northern Lights, Aurora Borealis, at least once before my life is over. So,
It
yeah.
is, I've been fortunate to see them before. They really are awe-inspiring. It reminds me of two experiences I think of where I expected to be disappointed and I wasn't. Instead, I was more than surprised. And the Northern Lights are one, but the other two were the Taj Mahal and total eclipses of the sun.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah, I'll put that on my list as well.
yeah, go ahead.
So I understand that ever since coming back home, you have one celebrated Canadian Thanksgiving, and two, having experienced the aftermath of Hurricane Fiona. So do describe those two dual experiences.
Yes, well, actually, one experience I didn't get to celebrate because
Oh,
I during Canadian Thanksgiving I actually went down to the United States to see my daughter in Nashville and also hear a concert of one of my late favorite songwriters called John Prine
oh,
and
right.
at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, and that was an amazing experience. But we did miss the hurricane, which devastated the island here. You can't see my dock down there because a tree fell on the ramp of my dock and it had to be removed. Luckily, that was the only major damage to our house. We had some little bit of roof damage, other than being without power for 6 days. But some people were without power for 12 days, so we felt lucky. And when with no power comes no water because the water pumps require power. The community used our generator while we were away to power the water pumps, which was helpful for the community, and I'm happy we were able to provide that service. But I didn't get to experience the fear and awe and terror that many of my neighbors told me about as the houses shook and rattled and the sound of the wind became unbearable. Uh, uh, but it was tragic to see how many how much devastation there was on the island. I mean, a lot of it came through okay, but trees down, especially big trees, big old trees, 200-year-old trees, which makes you feel particularly sad that they'd survived so many natural disasters of sorts over the years and then came down and in some cases killing livestock, which here is a big deal.
Mhm.
But anyway, it's evidence that you have to be prepared for the elements and in fact I'm way above the water sea level here. This is a tidal river behind me. Um, but we came back. They were halfway up our lawn was signs where this water level had come up to, 12, 15, 18 feet higher than it normally is.
I see. Well, I do hope that you are, practically recovered now.
We're,
Everything's working
we're
as usual.
recovered. Yeah, we're doing
And
fine.
as an aside, I should really listen to John Prine a lot more. I know that he passed away from COVID, right, in 2020.
He passed away from COVID. Yeah, he'd had cancer, so he was susceptible, I guess, his
Yeah,
immune system.
yeah.
But he was amazing songwriter, and it
Mhm.
was an amazing event, and one of the most famous sort of country music venues in the world.
Hmm.
Not that he was country music only. Uh, and fortunately, due to an error, I think I tweeted about this. Not an error, but I got an email from the Ryman the day before that because they were filming it, they had to use my seat for area for camera, so they moved me to the front row, and that was pretty nice.
Hmm. Right. We should begin discussing our main topic of this conversation, and that is your Substack, Critical Mass. And I should like to begin that by asking you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Uh, yeah, we're frozen out a bit, but okay. So my to repeat myself. So the Critical Mass Substack, and I'm assuming you launched that because you were concerned about the fracturing of the relationship between science, as in natural science, and politics, political discourse. And here's my question: how should the relationship between science and politics be?
Well, science should inform politics. Scientists shouldn't be making decisions, not in a free anyway. The public should, but they should be informed. And democracy can't function without informed members of the public and informed legislators. And so, science is a vital part of our human condition and impacts on every single political question you can imagine, from health to security to education to energy. Every important decision that governments make is impacted in one level or another by the results of science and the process of science, and those decisions be based on empirical evidence, and it isn't, unfortunately, but it should be.
Mhm.
And so it's the it I don't know, it's not the role of every scientist to try and inform governments about evidence, but I think it behooves us to try and build that connection more. And as someone with a public voice, I've tried for most of my life to try and promote that connection. And the critical mass isn't really just about science and politics. It's more. It's a deeper connection. It's science and culture. Science is a central part of our human experience in the 21st century. And as Jacob Bronowski says, it's you can't choose sides, but it's not a game. You can't choose sides. Like it or not, science is a key part of everything. And the ideas of science are fascinating as much as the and contribute to culture as much as culture contributes to our human our sense of human joy and wisdom and experience all over. And so I try to connect science and culture on both sides. And politics is part of culture. So critical mass celebrates all of that, as well as providing commentary on issues that may be relevant. And then, of course, my podcast, our podcast, the Origins Project Foundation podcast, is now been migrated to critical mass. So it's hosted there, and that's a large part of it. And of course, part of the podcast is connecting science and culture.
Yeah, I listen to the podcast with some frequency. I like it a lot. You know, and
Thank
so
you.
my next question is, so I suggested that our topic of conversation is the encroachment of politics, and what I mean is progressive politics into the STEM fields. And I wonder, as a practitioner of
Oh yeah, okay.
this,
So yeah, I've written a lot about that.
as a practitioner of the STEM fields who have, who have voiced his frustrations either in writing or in the form of the podcast on the problem.
Well, yeah, you made a point. I mean, I'm jumping in, I know, but
Yeah.
your key point is really well taken, and I didn't stress it enough in my answer to your last question. You're right. There's this important connection, but the connection the other way is extremely dangerous. Whether it's progressive politics or right wing politics, I think politics has no role in science. Science has a role in politics, but it's not uh, it's not commutative. politics has a it's does should have no role in science. And of course, it does to some extent. Political leaders determine the funding of science. But in terms of the search for the nature of reality, it's not progressive or conservative. And what people would like to be, how people would like the world to be, is irrelevant to the progress of science itself, which is to determine how the world really is. And the role of scientists themselves is not to promote any social justice concerns or to promote any ideological values. It's to promote the search for truth. That's it. And of course, what's happening more and more, and a lot of my critical mass writing has been about this lately, is the incursion of social justice issues in science. The tyranny of of demanding sort of um, loyalty oaths by people about social justice issues like gender and racism, and the claims that science is racist. These are absurd because they're not they're 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 not substantiated by evidence in any case. And moreover, the claims of what people would like to do, which is to impose demands on both researchers and the field to to uh, to have the field governed by rules that are not appropriate, is really a dangerous to science. Science should be based on scientific research, and the promotion of research should be based on merit and nothing else. And science is probably, when you look at most areas of the world, and there is racism, and to some extent, there's, especially in certain parts of the world, gender bias. But science is probably, in my mind, the most egalitarian of all fields, because good ideas inevitably rise to the top. It may be a struggle one way or another, but and particularly in the West, where I've been involved in education for decades, equity, as it's called now, has been to do it now is just absolutely ridiculous. It's been ongoing, and researchers are aware of it, and special provisions have been made for hiring and promotion of positions, and now to require produce tracts saying that they're, not only are they committed to promoting equity but some and diversity, but somehow they have a great experience doing it. Can you imagine a young string theory researcher who's been, a graduate student, a postdoc, now being forced to write some grant proposals showing how their work and their whole activity has been aimed at at promoting the social justice causes of diversity and equity? It's ludicrous. Moreover, even if it were appropriate, it's the wrong place to institute that. If you want to promote equality, which is equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome, you should be doing it in other areas, K to 12 education and inner cities, etc. Anyway, it's a long answer. I'm sure we'll get to more of it, but those are some of the issues that I've been concerned with lately.
I see. Well, given your very long and very thoughtful response, to my half-finished question, I think I should probably launch a better set of questions to you. And this question comes in two parts, and that is, I believe that the objectivity of science, the scientific method, has always been under challenge by the dominant political ideologies of that time. We see today the prominent one being progressive leftism, but in the old days, there was, phrenology was a legitimate scientific field, and so is eugenicsism, which is another form of progressivism. So my question to you is, how do we, scientists and non-scientists alike, keep guard against those?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I think we keep guard by making sure that we promote free inquiry, first of all, that we don't censor ideas, and we don't require adherence to certain ideologies in when we allow discussions and seminars, and we and science is a social activity. And the key part of science is that all ideas are subject to attack. It may sound vicious to say that, but that's how science works. The community, when you present an idea, it's subject to the community responding and with research that's based on it, or explorations of its internal consistency. And it's only by that mechanism that good ideas rise to the top and that science progresses. It isn't done by individuals. And so these ideas, be it eugenics or whatever incursion that someone thinks is a good idea that should be part of that should be promoted, they should be free to suggest that. But at the same time, the community should be free to attack that idea and show that its failings, and show that in case of ideas that don't work, that they don't work, or in case of ideas that are poorly framed and internally inconsistent, that they are internally inconsistent. And I think that means not imposing sanctions on people who speak out against any prevailing idea. Now, it's almost hard for me to say that, because science, normally you don't need to safeguard that. In science, the way you generally have proved your gained fame and fortune is to prove your colleagues wrong. I used to say we would go into work every day and try and prove our colleagues wrong, because that's the only way, in some sense, you get well known, right? Is by creating a new paradigm in some way or another. And and I shouldn't have to say that we need to safeguard the right to speak out, but in fact, that's what's happening now. We're seeing universities, administrators, scientific organizations led by people who are willing to sanction and restrict free and open inquiry, and sanction people for having made statements that other people don't like. It's just absurd and terrifying, and something that I never thought would be necessary to even discuss in the context of science. Certainly in the context of humanities and social sciences, there's been a lot of that over the years, but one always hoped that science would be immune from that, but it isn't now. And that's terrifying.
So that leads to the second part of my question. And, as someone who's has worked and studied in the academia environment for quite a while
You're
now.
cutting out.
Yeah. Like I said, as someone who has participated in the academic environment as a student, I'm deeply concerned about the increasing phenomenon of heterodox academics being routinely pushed out their environment. Your latest podcast features Peter Boghossian of Portland State. He is one prime example of that. And and of course, the increasing
And
progressive.
also the week before, a few weeks before that, was let me interrupt, is Janice Fiamengo 2 weeks before, who also
Oh,
was
wow.
forced out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Yeah, she's an interesting thinker, but yeah, as I
Yeah.
said, this issue, this problem, is also related to what you are seeing in the STEM fields of increasing calls for representations of genders and quote unquote marginalized groups. And I believe the people who are doing these things, the proponents of these ideas of inclusion and exclusion of ideas deemed intolerant, believe that the search for truth as the scientific method demands is in conflict with the quest for equality. And of course, you are careful to point out the distinctions between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. These are, but to steelman their position, their aims are noble. It is good to have equality within every field, science included. But does the quest for equality conflict with the search for truth? And I know your answer would be no, but but I like to hear
Yeah.
the why.
Well, look, I don't think that it's great to have equality. It's great to have equality of opportunity, but not all scientists are equal, and not all. I mean, it's really important to realize that scholarship is not a democracy. That merit is what causes ideas and individuals to rise, and that's the way it should be in science and in academia in general. So we don't want. I don't think it's a good idea to demand equality in terms of equal demographics. Are you going to have a certain number of short people and a certain number of tall people because of demographic society? Are you going to be, concerned if one group is anomalously successful? No. You should be making sure that everyone who's capable has the opportunity to contribute. And if that's what you mean by equality, absolutely. But we certainly don't want to institute equal numbers and based on demographics backgrounds, because that's just ridiculous. Not only that, but people have different interests and you know um, different capabilities. So people, you don't want to enforce things when people are clearly when the demographics within the research establishment is based on personal interests rather than people being excluded. But this notion that somehow science, yeah, the progress of science is somehow antithetical to social justice issues is really the most terrifying thing, because it harkens back to so many, totalitarian examples in the history of the 20th century, from Lysenko in Russia and other the notion that somehow the free and unfettered search for truth is a poses a danger to certain people, and that somehow certain ideas are symptomatic of white supremacy or privilege. That there's such a thing as black physics or white physics is just ridiculous. It's just stupid.
Mhm.
We shouldn't even waste our time listening to these people. But these people have a soapbox, and in fact, right now in many areas of science, they not only have a soapbox but are influencing the 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 policies of scientific organizations. I remember visiting China years ago and pointing out that I didn't like the idea of Western medicine and Eastern medicine. There's no such thing.
Yeah,
It's medicine.
yeah.
Like my friend Tim Minchin says, alternative medicine. You know what you call alternative medicine that works? You call it medicine. And so, I mean, different different races and cultures, they still have the same ATP and DNA, and their biological mechanisms are the same. And so to argue that somehow there's a kind of different medicine for is just ridiculous, because obviously biologically what's relevant is how their underlying cell structure works and governs their homeostasis and the same is true for physics. The notion that somehow physics would be different if it was done by women or done by people of color
Yeah.
is an affront,
Hmm.
because just think about the opposite. If you say if you were to say physics has to be done by white people because only that will really capture the true essence of the world, well, people would jump on that as racist, because it is. But the other statements are equally racist and equally fraudulent and equally dangerous.
Hmm. Right. I guess I'll add in a third part to my question, which is I wonder if there is a conflict between the scientific quest for objective truth, the search for it, and the goal of science in general, which, or at least the goal of virtually all scientists, which is to advance humanity. Um, and I think about this because, of course, if you watch American news these days, there are certain allegations that Dr. Fauci finance or supervise gain of function research in Wuhan, China, and that
Mm.
and the
Probably
virus was
did.
leaked out that laboratory, and it's a plausible theory, but I'd like to get into
It is plausible.
I'd like to get into the subject of gain of function research itself, because from what I hear, and I'm not an epidemiologist in any way, but from what I've heard is to manufacture or to manufacture a more efficient plague. You find out if a virus is transmissible from an animal or a plant to a human, and then and then you find out that how effective the virus in question would be, at least from my very basic understanding of it. So, again, the conflict between the search for truth and the goal to advance humanity. And the 20th century equivalent for it would be the atomic bomb. So, so
Well,
my
look,
question to you now.
let me jump in before you ask your specific question because there's a lot you've unpacked there,
Yeah.
and I want before you get to the specifics, I want to comment on two things. First of all, the search for truth is the science determines the way the world is, whether you like it or not. And so the goal of science is if the results of science determine results that you don't like, too bad. If the results of science determine results that you think may oppose your ideas of social justice, um, if science were to determine that that there are um, uh, differences between groups that you don't want there to be differences between, too bad. The results are what they are. So that's a really important, and that's why some people feel threatened because they're worried that results will suggest that they're requiring a need and a quota for certain individuals, but if the results suggest that isn't useful, they're worried that those needs and quotas will not be enacted. Secondly, I don't think the goal of scientists per se is to help humanity. I think the goal of scientists, most of them go into science because they find it enjoyable and they like asking the questions. They recognize that science itself has helped humanity. Science is responsible for the modern world in which we live, where people live longer and more productive and generally better lives with more, not only just more material possessions, but safer, healthier, and on the whole, I think often happier. And so that's a byproduct of science. But the reason scientists do what they do, most of them, is because they like doing it, and they find the search for truth to that or the effort to uncover mysteries to be exciting and 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 fun. Um, and so that I wanted to comment on those two things you said because I think there's some misrepresentations of reality. The other thing I want to mention is the gain of function thing, because the point of the gain of function, as I understand it, I did a podcast on with Matt Ridley on his book Viral, which went into the different possibilities for the sources of COVID-19. And gain of function, as far as I understand it, was originally promoted to say we should anticipate what might happen to certain viruses so we can then be ahead of the game and produce vaccines or be prepared for those things. Other people counter by saying that's not worthwhile doing because you can't anticipate what's going to happen, and the dangers inherent in gain of function activities outweigh the possible benefits. And as far as I can tell, that's still true. That no one effectively showed in the gain of function work that was being done in Wuhan or elsewhere that they were able to anticipate what viruses might spring by zoonosis from one species to another. No one anticipated that for COVID-19, for example, or for COVID in that way, and the dangers are apparent. So I think no one has really demonstrated that gain of function research is really particularly useful from a scientific perspective, much less a public health perspective. But that's my understanding. In any case, I've now interrupted you in the middle of two questions, but you can continue.
Well, I guess you're welcome to do it one more time, I guess. But
Yeah, okay.
yeah, so I have some issues regarding your idea that scientists should follow the truth objectively, and that strikes me as a bit amoral. not immoral, but amoral, lacking in morality, because truth itself is a value, a moral value, and the fact that scientists choose to pursue objective truth, and that is in itself, they are professing a moral claim.
What do you mean truth is a moral value?
Well,
You mean wanting to find the truth might be a moral value, but truth itself has no morality one way or another. The world, as I think one of my favorite science fiction writers uh, said, reality is that which continues to exist even when you stop believing in it. And that's just true, right? What the truth of the world is the way is continues to exist whether you believe in it or not. So truth has no moral value. Valuing the search for truth may be a moral or ethical issue, but truth itself doesn't have any moral value.
right, yeah,
That was my third interruption.
that was what I was getting at. But but having little or no concern about the implications of what your findings may be may strike me as a bit callous, and I wonder if I wonder if that is an inherent conflict. How
Well,
could
you're,
this
you're right,
benefit or harm humanity?
but but there's a difference between I mean, I'm not requiring people to have no concerns about the possible implications of one's activities, but but um, that's different than having that completely govern all of one's activities. Because first of all, it's hard to know the implications of your activities. You can't possibly. It's very difficult to know all the implications of the work you're going to do, unless it's very applied. It's hard to know what those implications are, right? Because at a fundamental level, when you discover new knowledge, it can be used in lots of different ways, and and you're not responsible for all the ways it's going to be used. And almost everything that's discovered has some potential utility, which is probably negative. But does that mean we should not do any of it because there's always risks, there's always possible dangers to anything? So I think you have to be a little circumspect there. I think now it is true that certain activities which have clear outcomes and clear dangers need to be addressed by the community. The atomic bomb was one, and the scientists who were working on that had to be pretty clear about the dangers of what they were doing. At the same time, they felt that the Second World War, that they were motivated by urgent needs, and they decided they would do that. But in retrospect, it opened a Pandora's box that we wish we could have closed. But in other areas like genetic engineering and recombinant DNA work, where there are clear possible dangers, the scientific community needs to come together and recognize those and have a and have methodologies that control the known risks, the known negative risks. But you can't control the unknown risks, nor should you, I think. And so you have to, if something is clearly being done whose main result is going to be negative, you need to at least examine that as a community and decide if there should be regulations or if the community should have some codes of conduct. But it's hard. It's a very slippery slope. Let's take genetic modification of foods as an example. Um, some people are so afraid of genetic modifications of food, even though we've been doing it as a species
Yeah.
since human agriculture began.
Mhm.
Um, and and on the whole, it's a good thing. Okay, and people are afraid of it because there's maybe potential negative side effects, and there always can be. But to argue that it has no positive value is ridiculous. It's caused many people to be alive today that wouldn't have been alive otherwise, to obviate famines or avoid famines by producing crops that are more resistant to parasites and in certain cases to weather changes. So you can always look at every part of science and say, well, there's some potential danger there. But you could say that about life. Asking questions, there's potential danger to asking any question. There's potential danger to knowledge. Maybe that's why the religious myth of the Garden of Eden kept Adam and Eve from having knowledge, because the knowledge is a terrifying thing. But happily, we are blessed with intellects that allow us to ask questions, and increase our knowledge and produce the world we live with. But the world is rife with risks and dangers as well as benefits. We have to have an open, keep our eyes open to all of them, and be willing to discuss all of them. But we shouldn't close things down because out of fear that any new knowledge is going to be dangerous, and I worry about that a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, and to quote the late Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, there are known knowns and there are known unknowns, and we should find out what both of those
Yeah,
are.
and they're unknown unknowns. And yeah, and that's the point. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my new book in that way. We can know what we don't know. At least we can know some of what we don't know. Though there's some things we know we don't know. But and those are the kind of things that science progresses on. But what's great about science is it often uncovers the unknown unknowns
Mm,
and the big surprises. And that's for me the greatest benefit of science. It's not that we're proceeding by a linear scale to tackle each known unknown and put it aside. It's the fact that in that search, you come up with things you never expected, and it totally changes our direction of thinking. That's what makes life exciting, and that's what makes science exciting.
mhm. Yeah, and I hope to segue into a more benign or helpful form of nuclear, and that is nuclear power. I listened to your podcast episode with Michael Schellenberger, interesting
Yeah,
journalist and thinker, and your rival in writing a book about climate change that is readable.
I wouldn't say rival. We had very different goals there, but anyway.
But Mr. Schellenberger has been pretty vocal about his defense of nuclear power as an eventual alternative for fossil fuels. And I wonder what is your opinion on that?
Well, I agree with parts. I agree with his. I sympathize with his point of view. Namely, nuclear power should be an integral part of our energy strategy worldwide and nationally as well. Nuclear power is a very important source of energy, and it can be a relatively safe source of energy. And it doesn't produce carbon products in the atmosphere, so it's incredibly important. It's also highly intensive in the language of Schellenberger, namely that you get a lot of bang for your buck, unlike solar power or other things that are more distributed. The intensity that comes out is less than there is from a nuclear power plant. So I think it's incredibly important. On the other hand, it's limited in what it can do, I don't think it's a panacea. I don't think it's a magic bullet that will solve our problems because nuclear power plants are incredibly expensive and economically intensive um, activities and they require a lot of coordination and they require a lot of planning and and um, and therefore their utility is limited in regions where you can't do that, and moreover there are many aspects of the energy challenge, and one is productions, but other is distribution, and uh, and producing energy locally. It may be more useful in areas, and especially when you're trying to consider the uh, uh, transmission of energy, electrical energy in particular, and energy storage. Um, Probably energy storage, electrical energy storage, is a bigger challenge than production in many ways, and a lot of research has to go into that. So I don't know of any serious group who's looked at energy strategies that says we should go to 100% nuclear.
Mhm.
I think nuclear should be a component of any strategy, and those people who want to ban nuclear power just don't understand it and are often fighting, as Michael has pointed out, are often anti-environmental in the end for looking at the alternatives. And I think it's been very important that he's pointed that out. But I think most people that I've studied who looked at this in detail have said it should be there are many facets to what we need to do, and nuclear power is one, conservation is another, sustainable energy is another, energy storage is another. You have to look at lots of different ways to try and mediate and moderate the problem of energy production and carbon production, and there's no single one solution to that problem.
Right. So I know that scientists are very highly skeptical of clairvoyancy, but I guess I'd like you to predict the
That's a
future.
mild way of putting it. Yes.
I'd like you to, I guess, make a prediction for the future in that, do you envision a future in which, rather than depleting all of our fossil fuel storage, we still have them, but we just don't use them anymore because there are more viable energy alternatives available?
I don't predict the future less than 2 trillion years into the future. It's a rule of mine.
Yeah, we all know
Um,
what's going to
there are
happen
two
then.
reasons for that. One, no one will be around to check my predictions, and two, it's much easier to make those predictions. But I think anyone who claims they're a futurist is not worth listening to.
Mhm.
And what will happen in the next century in terms of fossil fuels is anyone's guess. And on a good day, I have hopes, and on a bad day, I'm completely pessimistic. And and um, and all I think we can do to try and make ensure that we do work in a good direction is to try and educate people and continue to ask questions and openly discuss the realities of the world, which is what I try and do. And hopefully that will help us lead us in the right direction. I can't do more than that, but certainly I don't make predictions.
All right. Well, so final question. I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on, your great friend and, someone who both of us admire, Christopher Hitchens, journalist, writer. Um,
Hmm.
I have, after his passing, I have not heard anyone who's had anything, bad to say about him. But while he was alive,
I
he,
have.
well, but while he was
Anyway, go
alive,
on.
yeah, while he was alive and writing, he had something to infuriate everyone, like even myself.
I'm
And I
sure.
wonder, I wonder if, given his stature as a great journalist and irritant to the masses, what can we learn from Mr. Hitchens today?
Well, we can learn a lot by listening to him and assessing his ideas, even while he was alive, and we can still do that now that he's passed. Happily, he's still accessible by his writings, his books, and his many YouTube and other TV appearances. I think that perhaps the most important, it's hard to say it's the most important. He's done so many things, but one of the lasting legacies for me, and he wasn't the first person to point this out, but he's the first person that really made me realize it, is that freedom of speech is important because it's not that we need to, the right of freedom of speech isn't to give the rights to the person who's giving the speech. Those rights are not what's really important. It's the right of the listener to learn that they're wrong. And
Mm,
when we restrict freedom of speech, we infringe upon the rights of listeners to learn that they're wrong. And that's really why we need to enforce freedom of speech. All of us have the right to learn that we are wrong by hearing something we violently disagree with, and eventually finding that the person saying it might be making sense. And I think Christopher said it probably much more eloquently than I did, but I think that right is what really he kept fighting for. And one of the reasons he was happy to infuriate people was to provoke them to think about those ideas and decide if maybe they were wrong or whether he was. And he would be willing to, well, maybe not always willing to admit he was wrong, but he certainly, in science, he was happy to learn things from me. That's all I can say.
with that being said, thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence Krauss, a great scientific mind and a great friend of Christopher, for joining this program. I wish you all the best of luck with your Substack, your podcast, and your new book, Known Unknowns. Thank you again and take care.
Thank you again. As usual, it was a pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you, and good luck with your podcast and your other activities.
Thank you.